a very warm welcome. Off you go, Manj.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I am absolutely delighted to be here. And I'm so grateful to Property Sisters for letting me use this forum to share my thoughts on how we can use contracts to help succeed in our property business. Before I do that, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. Okay, so who's Manj Mahal? I'm a co-founder of Maple Square Properties, which was established to bring together two generations of 30 plus years experience of property investing and developing. I personally bought my first property in 2004, but our family's been investing in property since the 80s. We invest and develop HMOs, mixed-use and commercial properties in Surrey and Southwest London. Our core strategy is long-term hold and build to rent. Outside that, I've got two beautiful young boys. One is 8 years old and the second one is 11. So just a caveat that normally my eldest, he'd go and play rugby. He's not doing that today. So if he comes in, you just have to bear with me. On the corporate side, I'm a qualified accountant and works as a commercial management consultant on a full-time basis, something I've done for over 13 years. My specialism is contracts, procurement, negotiations, and renegotiations. Over my professional career, which is now nearly 20 years, I worked for two of the big four accountancy firms. And during that period, I have worked with large private and public sector organizations at board level, working with them and helping them navigate the complex world of contracts, help them manage risks, and helps them save millions of pounds and rescue many relationships. I'm also a member of IACCM, which is a global organization of contract management. They have got members across 183 countries, and over 90% of global 500 companies are members of this organization. There's some logos on the left-hand side of some of the organizations I worked with, but when you worked in a profession for many, many years, that number just grows and grows. And one of the advantages as part of being a member of a global community is that I've got access to most up-to-date and latest thinking and research on contracts and how, as businesses, we can use those as a tool. So, what is my objective? Now, one of the things which I really love is a thinking framework and a principle-based approach. When I was in college and university, I studied economics, and there's lots of principles I've learned which are still used, like demand and supply, diminishing rate of return, equilibrium. And the reason I use those because they're very easy to remember. And what I want to share with you today is some fundamental commercial principles around contracts so that you can use those as an enabler to run your business and manage risks better. A little caveat, I am not a solicitor, I'm not a lawyer. When we are working with these multinational organizations, we always work with solicitors, and they give us the legal perspective. We are there to help clients, to help them manage risk and businesses from a commercial perspective. So what I'm going to share with you is not a legal view, it's more from a commercial perspective. So what we're going to cover, the first thing, I just want to share some examples of when things go horribly wrong, what happens. Then I want to dispel some myths around contracts. And then I would like to talk you through how contract structure can drive behaviors. And then we'll go on to how we can use contracts as business tools before we move on to how that theory can be applied to some of the contracts which we will come across in our property investing and development before we spend some time answering your questions. So contracts in the headlines, things go horribly wrong all the time. In the property world, we hear stories about investments going wrong, disputes with the builders, all sorts of things. But more often than not, we don't hear about those things because either they're settled out of court or they're just not big enough to make the headlines. But those contracts which do make the headlines, and when you actually delve deeper into what happened, the fundamental issues actually are not that dissimilar to why things go wrong in our world. So there's two examples I would like to share. The first one is a local authority. They claim that they've overpaid his building repairs contractor by 19 million. The second one is, which is just absolutely tragic, is the Grenfell tragedy. What's at the heart of both of these is actually multiple failings at the contract levels. So the first one, I was personally involved in this review. This is the Birmingham City Council. This is in the public domain. You can go and look up, and there's a lot more information than what I'm able to share with you. But the gist of this was a long-standing relationship where over a period of time, what the council thought they were buying was very different from actually what was being delivered. The second issue was the people who were managing the contract, they did not understand the commercial structure. When we walked through the doors with my team, I asked them, where's your contract? They pointed us to their basement where we were handed, I can't remember the number of boxes of leverage files. And immediately we knew that it is impossible for the contract management team to know the commercial structure which they've signed up to. So those were the kind of very headline reasons why things went wrong. We don't have time to go into everything. The second one is the Grenfell tragedy. Again, I think one of the key issues I want to share with you, and those of you who are close to this, you know there's a public inquiry, and that goes into lots and lots of reasons as to exactly what's happened. But one of the reasons I want to share with you, and it's just absolutely shocking, but you know, we see this happen all the time, where the person who was appointed as clerks of work, he said that there was a confusion about my role. There's a very clear definition of the roles and responsibility of clerks of work. They are there to monitor and sign the quality of the work. So the person, when he presented himself in front of the inquiry board, he said that there was a confusion about my role. I was just a site manager. A site manager goes to the site to make sure the work gets done, whereas the clerks of work make sure that the work is done to an adequate standard. There's a multiple layers of contracting failing underneath this horrible tragedy. So, some myths around contracts. When you're a hammer, everything is a nail. And as someone who spent a lot of time in this world, I see lots of things through the lenses of contracts. So I have this conversation with my friends and family, and some of the words I hear, I don't need a contract. Absolutely, you don't need a contract for everything, but lots of property sisters, you provide services to other individuals, other businesses. So I would say that think very hard about when there will be circumstances you don't need a contract. You bring a plumber in to fix your leaking toilet. You're not going to say to him that not letting you through until you sign a contract. But then there will be lots of occasions. We're signing JV agreements. We're signing a big refurbishment contracts. We are providing goods and services to others where we do need a contract. Sometimes I think people say that because it's just lazy. So just think about that. The second one is that I just get things done and the lawyers just deal with the contract. Of course, you don't involve lawyers every time you're signing a contract, but where you are still responsible for making sure that the commercial T's and C's and the commercial structure of the contract is in line with what you think you are buying and is going to help you deliver your objectives in the long run. So you still need to get involved in structuring the commerciality of that contract. The lawyers just put a legal framework around that. The other party's form of contract looks fair, so I'll just accept it. I think as human beings, we are very trusting. We think that if someone's handed something over to you, they've been fair. And I have picked up so many T's and C's in the contract or the T's and C's of other party, which is actually not fair and not aligned with how I want to work with individuals. So take some time, read those, challenge those. Nothing in writing and no signature means no contract. That is not entirely true. If someone's provided you goods or service, yes, we can go through this debate over what that means if you end up in the court. But just because there isn't a legal written contract doesn't mean that you don't have a contract in place. You might have exchanged emails, you might have exchanged text messages. So just think about that. And this is my favorite one size fits all. How often we get messages from other people? Can you share your options agreement with me? Can you share your loan agreement with me? Can you share your JV agreement with me? And we are not the only ones who are guilty of this. I have seen large organizations and Birmingham City Council, when we looked at their contract, it was a copy and paste of another contract. It was making reference to another organization. So by all means, ask other people for copies of their contract, but please do take time to make sure that it's aligned with what the service, goods or services you are commissioning, you are buying, but also it's right for you. Because in the long run, it's not going to help you if you end up in the court, if it's just a copy and paste of other contracts. So how commercial structure drive different behaviors? I like rules. And if you take nothing else away from this presentation, just remember these three things. Contracts actually are, the way we look at it is all about risks. We are transferring risk to another party and we are paying for that. So they deserve to be paid more if we are transferring more risks. But one of the fundamental principles is that risk should be allocated to the party who's best able to manage it. In the example of Grenfell, where the tenant's management organization, by writing the definition of clerks of work and assigning that responsibility to this particular organization, thought that they will have someone in place who will monitor the quality. But that individual, that organization wasn't best placed to manage that risk because they did not have allocated to the party best able to manage it. In the example of Grenfell, where the tenant management organizations allocated the responsibility to monitor the quality of work to these organizations, didn't have the right experience and expertise. So when we work with other organizations, we need to make sure that the other party, they have got the right experience and expertise to manage that risk. The second point is that the more risk we transfer, the more we are expected to pay. So when we are building something, if we are bringing is that you can never transfer the ultimate risk. Again, in the case of Birmingham City Council, the example I've shared, and also Grenfell, regardless of the complexity and the detail you have written into your T's and C's, the ultimate risk will always come back to you. So when you're building something, you may have a main contractor and you feel that you have transferred all the risks. But if things start to go wrong, ultimately, you as an individual, buck will still stop with you. So just think about these three roles. And what I would say, if you take nothing else away from this, just think about these three things. And the risk and this role manifests itself in three ways. The first one is outcome, output, and input. When we are buying goods or services, sometimes we are not clear about what it is that we are purchasing. Outcome, for example, if I've got two children, when I went out shopping for car seats, I wasn't really looking for car seats. I was buying an outcome, i.e. the ability of that car seat to keep my children safe when they were traveling in a car. Output is a car seat. When we're bringing a builder in to refurb a project, refurb a building, and we are paying them on day rate, that is input. And I think the red flag for me here is when we think we are buying an outcome, but actually we are buying an input or output. A good example would be property training. So we are sold dreams because it's unregulated. We are sold dreams around property training. We are told that if you come on this course, you will be multi-millionaire and live in this amazing house. But what we actually delivered is input. We pay for that person to deliver that training for that 1 day or 2 day or whatever that might be. Output, we walk away with this leverage file. But doing that training does not deliver the outcome. So sometimes we think we're buying an outcome, but we are buying an input. Carolina does an amazing job when she talked to clients about her brochures, her marketing material she produced. She's not selling output. She's actually saying that if you use these services, you'll be able to sell your developments in much shorter space of time than if you didn't have that. That's an outcome. So all I'll say is that, just be clear about what you are buying and making sure what you are paying is in aligned with what you're actually getting. The second way it transfers itself is the how we are paying. So if you're paying a
So we can have contracts where there's a fixed price and variable price, and there's a lots of in between. When we are agreeing a fixed price, the other party is taking more risk. When we are agreeing a variable price, we are taking more risk. If I get someone in to build a house for me, and I'm saying I'll pay you by day rate, I am taking more risk because the other party's got no incentive to make that process efficient and effective. Whereas if I'm saying to them, I'm going to pay you X amount of money, then I'm transferring more of the risk. Also think about your underlying risk appetite. We are very risk averse, and we have signed up to many of our mortgage deals are 5 years fixed. Of course, we're paying more for that than variable one, but that's okay. We are happy to pay for that premium for peace of mind. I think my red flag here is sometimes when we think we are paying a fixed price, but actually what we're paying is a variable price. A specification will be a good example. We're not always that great at exactly specifying what it is that we are looking for. So we say we want X, Y, and Z, and we agree if what we think is a fixed price. Then we start changing things. And then all of a sudden we end up with a big bill, which is a lot bigger than what we anticipated or budgeted for. So think very hard about the actual price you are paying, not what think you're paying, and make sure it's aligned with the service you are getting. And the final one is the terms and conditions. So if you've got a contract with very onerous T's and C's, you are going to pay more for that because supplier is taking more risk. Whereas if they are onerous in your for you that you in favor of supplier, then you are taking on more risk. When it comes to terms and conditions, also just check that they are proportionate to what you're buying. So for example, a termination with a day's or a week's notice is not going to help you develop a very good relationship. Or if you're putting unlimited liability in a contract, if someone's just building a small extension for you. And also sometimes meaningless because if you're working with small organizations, they don't have a balance sheet. So if you're putting unlimited liabilities, then actually it's not worth a lot to you if things start to go wrong. And bringing it all together, again, I think in our experience, things go wrong when there is a misalignment between what they are getting and what they think they are getting, and the charging mechanism and the understanding of all of this. As a general principle, all other things being equal, if you're on the left-hand side, you're expected to pay more. And if you're on the right-hand side, you're expected to pay less because you are taking more risk. And therefore, you need to make sure that you have the experience and expertise of to manage those risks. Otherwise, it will end up costing you a lot more money in the long run. I hope that makes sense. So contracts as a business tool, how we can use contracts to save money, avoid disputes and improve relationships. Given we've lost some time due to poor connection, I'm going to quickly run through this because I want to talk through some real examples. So I talk about alignment and relationship. Alignment is so critical. Again, making sure that you're very clear about what it is that you want to buy. It's an outcome, output, or input, and ensuring that your underlying commercial structure is aligned with that. And the relationship, end of the day, people buy from people. Things go wrong all the time. And we need to, as property entrepreneurs, we need to understand that the people we are working with, what is driving them? What is driving the behaviors, perverse behaviors, as well as good behaviors, which is going to help you drive your business forward. And invest time in developing and building those relationships. But at the same time, ensure that you've got a contractual mechanism in place to help you if things go wrong. The other term I hear a lot about, I trust this person. I think trust is something, I've had my own fair share of trusting people too easily. The only thing I'll say on that is that it needs to be validated. Just because, you work with someone and you trust them doesn't mean that you stop challenging them and stop having contracts in place which will help you if things go wrong, circumstances change. So around this, I'll say plan. So spend some time thinking about where you want to be, what it is that you're buying, and skills. If you are taking on more risk, ensure that you've got the right experience and expertise to manage those risks. Of course, you can save money by project managing a new build yourself, but you are taking on a lot more risk. Do you have the right experience and expertise to project manage that project. If not, then you will end up losing a lot more money in the long run. Ownership, having that clarity as to who is doing what. A lot of the time, yes, we get involved in smaller projects, but little lack of clarity around who's doing what can cost you time and money. Performance, you need to put some sort of mechanism to ensure that everyone is absolutely clear as to what is expected of them. If you haven't set it out, how are you going to manage that individual or that organization? Change. A lot of the time, things change. We set out to purchase something or build something, specification change. Ensure that you're getting those things in writing. Because if you don't have things in writing, a lot of the disputes we get involved in where people have made verbal agreements, not got things in writing, and then no one ends up in a happy place. Finance. Have you got the experience, expertise, and time to ensure that you are checking what you're paying with what you've agreed? Have you got the experience and expertise and time to ensure that if for a construction contract, you have signed a cost plus open book contract, that you're invoking that clause and making sure that you're validating the underlying costs? Sometimes we'll work with clients, they have these wonderful clauses. One, they don't understand them. Two, they don't use them. Do you help those contracts as a business tool? So just use some of these tips to help you when you are thinking through buying goods and services and looking at contracts. And those contracts don't necessarily need to be, a document which you get a lawyers involved. No, those could just be some, documents which you have put together. And again, risk. What runs at the heart of everything is risk, understanding of risks and how you're going to manage and mitigate that. Just because you've done a detailed risk log at the start of the project doesn't mean that you put that to one side, because risk needs to be monitored, managed, and mitigated on an ongoing basis, because things change. So applying the theory I want to, just conscious of time. So I wanted to talk through 3 types of contracts and how some of that theory can be applied. Building contracts. So here's a picture of 2 of our projects. Now a lot of our building projects, we project manage them ourselves because we have got the experience and expertise to project manage the contracts. But more of some of the complex one, we bring in the main contractors. Now this is an example. On the left-hand side, the bricklayer was getting paid based on how many bricks he was laying. The one on the right-hand side, he was getting paid on day rate. So clearly the one on the left-hand side is significant compromise on quality because he was just rushing through this. And the one on the right-hand side was getting paid on day rate. So he took a bit more care when he was laying the bricks. This was another example, quality. So this is an example this is a picture from one of our recent projects where there was large chunks of the new areas where there was no insulation. Now, because we were project managing this ourselves, we made sure that we went around checking where there was no insulation. Now, some of you may say, bring other people in. Some people say building control, they check these things. Well, they do, but they don't check every single area of the new build project. So again, when you are project managing a building project yourself, you are taking on quality risks sometimes. You're also taking on cost overrun risks, because if the project takes a lot longer than you've anticipated, then you are paying for it, especially if you're paying on day rate basis for some of the refurb project, which we do. You're also taking a risk of some of the unknowns. There's things which you discover during the build phase, which you wasn't aware of. So you're taking on more risk. This is wanted to cover this at a very high level, how some of the theory can be applied. Now, in one of our more recent projects where we had a fixed price contract, now on that one, some of these risks were transferred over to the other party. But when we inspected the building ourselves, we still found some significant issues around the quality of the work. Again, it goes back to you can never transfer the ultimate risk. Lots of us use virtual assistants. So again, when you are working with a virtual assistant, what it is that you're buying, because a lot of the time you buy time. But if you are using a virtual assistant to say, for example, write process and procedures so that your tenancy check-in a check-in process is a lot more efficient and effective. You are buying outputs. But if you are saying to your virtual assistants that I want to have minimal number of voids, say I want to have no more than 2% voids, that's an outcome. And how you're going to reward your virtual assistants for that is going to be very different from if you're just paying for their hours. And also how you're going to monitor that performance is going to be very different as well. If you're paying someone on input basis, you are likely to have slightly different performance measures than if you're paying someone on outcome basis. The final one I want to talk about professional services. Again, an example I like to use is working with architects. If you're paying an architect for doing a set of drawings, very simple drawings, and you're agreeing a fixed price, the underlying risk transfer is very different from if you're working with an architect and you are not paying them unless you get approval. Because then you're transferring a lot of the risks to the other party, and how that other party will be rewarded will be very different. You expect, it's highly likely that they will charge you significantly higher amount than if they were working on a fixed price, because they are taking on a lot more risk. Roles and responsibilities, another one. We are working on we are currently going through a planning process for a large project. And initially there was lack of clarity as to who's responsible for managing other professionals, other surveyors, other individuals who were responsible for pulling some of the reports together. Just give some time to who's responsible for what, but also the commercial structure. If you want to develop a long-term relationship with a firm of architects and planning consultant, maybe you want to agree a commercial arrangement where they are motivated to work with you on an ongoing basis, but they are suitably rewarded for taking on that bigger risk. So this is what we've covered. So this is what we've covered. I don't necessarily want to go through this because I think I've overrunning. But again, the objective was to leave you with some fundamental commercial principles around contract, which you can take away and apply to when you're thinking about procuring, commissioning goods and services for your business. I hope that despite the technology interruptions we've had, we achieved that objective. Finally, if you want to get in touch with me, my company website address, which is recently launched, thanks to some accountability groups set up by Carolina. I'm on LinkedIn, but I use LinkedIn mainly for my day job. And my Insta handle is Manj Mahal. Now we move on to any questions you may have.
That's great. Thank you so much, Manj, and well done for getting through that with the difficulties in technology. Some really, really interesting points there. If you don't mind just stopping screen sharing, then we'll be able to see more. Perfect. So we've got a couple of questions in the chat box for now. And the first one comes from TJ. She wants to know how you find a good project manager and should they belong to a certain organisation?
Yeah, so I think, TJ, in terms of our property world, like I said, we project manage lots of our projects ourselves because our family's been in property for several years, and we've got the experience and expertise to project manage the project ourselves. But if this was one of our clients, then the advice I would give to them is, if you're looking for a project manager and you have got a contract which sits underneath that, you need to ensure that that person does have the experience of working on those kind of contracts. So, for example, if you want to bring in someone to project manage a new build, but that person's only ever project managed refurb projects, then there's a misalignment between the skill set which you're looking for and what that person can offer. But I'm sure there's other property sisters here who have used the project managers for their property project who can input more into that. But for our projects, we mainly do it ourselves.
Great. And Carolina's asking how you can say goodbye to a non-performing contractor in the best possible way. Basically, how do you get rid of them, fire them, and what notices you should serve them?
So I think the first of all notice is, a lot of the time when you're working with other individuals, if it's not written in the contract, if you haven't specified that whether it needs to be 2 weeks or 3 weeks, then I would say that, when we've done it, we've kind of done it by mutual agreement, and we try to be fair to other individuals. And in terms of the, how you do that, again, I think a lot of the time it goes back to, what you've agreed, the T's and C's. So, in my professional world, there's like the HR gets involved and the process is a lot long-winded. Whereas in the property world, if you're working with someone and they're not delivering on your expectations, then, I just tend to have upfront conversations with those individuals. As long as I haven't signed up to something which tie me into that relationship over a longer period of time.
And is that ensuring that you couldn't be challenged in a court?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
That's correct.
Dorothy's asking if you could share your details again. So maybe afterwards you could just put them into the chat box. That would be great. I know that Caroline has added in. Actually, Caroline is doing it for you.
Oh, thank you, Carolina.
Does anybody else have any questions for Manj at all? Oh, yes, we have one more from TJ. Would you recommend always using a JCT contract for your refurbs?
No, not necessarily. I think, again, this goes to one size fits all myth, that it really needs to be aligned with, what it is that the complexity of the project and what serves you well. So the straight answer is no. I think it depends on, what you're buying. And
would you put an amount on that? As in, would you sort of put a cap on sort of what level bill that is?
Yes, us personally, I think, for us, anything under, for example, anything under 100K, we usually work with a builder who's worked with us for 30 odd years. And we will still have a contract with him, but it will be a lot less complex than anything over that, where when we are working with a new construction companies, then we will put, have a bit more complex contract.
I think it's been really useful. Particularly my takeaway was the relationship between outcome, output and input. I think that was something that also Ruth commented on on YouTube. It's really difficult to define those three elements.
I think in both in corporate world and the property world, like I said, the issues arises when there's a lack of clarity around what you're buying. You think you're buying outcome, but actually all you're doing is paying for inputs. And that's where a lot of the dissatisfaction and breakdown in relationship happens. And that's why it pays to spend some time upfront to really understand what it is that you want to buy and what you're actually buying.
I think also interestingly, ladies, we do quite a lot of contracts with our clients where it says black and white, because obviously we don't want anyone to be exposed and not know what they're buying. You would be surprised that people don't always read the contract. And we couldn't explain it more. It's it has a little description right now on all of the things that people could misinterpret, but some stuff you can't misinterpret, and they would still come back and say, well, I thought it was this or that. So yeah, it's just purely through not reading the contract. Not reading. I mean, I've never in my life not read the contract. So read the contract is rule number one.
I think a lot of the time, an example, I mean, we've all probably heard some horrendous stories about where people's gone out and bought properties on auction and not actually read the contract and not paid someone like just a little bit of money for them to read the contract, and then signed up to T's and C's or bought stuff which which just like cost them so much money in the long run. And unfortunately, this is not just, we are all SME property investors and developers, but again, when we're working with large multinationals as well, we still find instances where people haven't read the contract, or they've read it, but they've actually not really understood the T's and C's and the commercial structure of the contract. And that's where things go wrong.
Yeah, and there is no shame in coming back and asking questions on a contract. I think anybody who's listening, that's really, there is absolutely no shame. If you don't understand something, come back and clarify it before going into it. Read it first, and clarify.
I think I'll say challenge it as well, because just because someone sent you something and that contract is from these large organizations or organizations you come across really well, but something doesn't make sense to you and you think, actually, how is this relevant to me? Challenge it, Because like I said, a lot of the organizations also do this copy and paste, just, passing on contracts from one client to another rather than adapting it to ensure that it meets your circumstances. And then you don't want to sign up to a contract which actually is so not relevant and appropriate for what you're buying or delivering.
And I think that's really timely, because Fiona's asked, do you have insurance to pay for legal if you need to challenge your contracts?
So do we have insurance to pay for legal? So I'll say that, no, we don't. No, we don't. Because a lot of the time in our property world, the contracts which we have are, I would say, relatively more straightforward. Whereas in the corporate world, even in the corporate world, I don't think I've yet to come across a client who's actually have insurance to pay for legal if things go wrong. Usually the two parties just end up in the court. And I think, sometimes we say this phrase we used to use in the professional services, that no one get fired for hiring one of the big fours, because really what they're buying is insurance if things go wrong.
And who should be helping you to initially create that contract? Is it a joint work between yourself, the project manager, and the solicitor? That's from Dorothy.
Yes, so initially, I think in our case, again, it very much goes back to your own experience and expertise. But I would say as an individual, we use this word contract, but really what I would say is that, no one knows better than yourself, what you are buying, what you want to buy, and what kind of risks you are willing to take. So, when I talk to some of the people who actually don't necessarily have the same background as me, I'm saying just write it down, what you're buying, what the end will look like, what's your ideal outcome here. And then by all means, if it's a bit more complex, then you want to then take it to a solicitor, they will put some legal words around that and legal framework. But the responsibility, you always need to sit with you to ascertain and then articulate what you are buying, what sort of price you are happy to pay, and what sort of risks you're willing to take for that. Because solicitors can't really do that for you, because that needs to come from you. Again, it goes back to ultimate risk can never be transferred. But if you've not been involved in writing the commercial structure, the commercial bits of the contract, then you may not necessarily understand what you've signed up to.
And I think that's something you should just repeat again. Ultimate risk should never be transferred. That's a really, really big takeaway from this whole presentation. No. And go back and don't assume things, and check and verify. Don't be afraid to say, I don't understand what that means. Please, can you explain it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Again, like I said, three things if you take nothing else away, ultimate risk can never be transferred. And the risk should be transferred to the party who's best able to manage it. And the third thing is that more risk you transfer, the more you should be paying. You cannot expect to transfer more risk and still be paying as if you are taking on all the risk. And this goes back to having that understanding, giving some thought to actually what you're buying and your underlying risk appetite as well.
Fantastic. Well, I just want to say thank you on behalf of all of us for a really
thank you.
Really, really interesting. I thought contracts boring, but no, it was not at all. It was fascinating. So thank you so much for that, Manj.
Thank you for listening.
So we are going to just pause for a moment before we go to our next presentation.